You don't remember the first time it happened, but you remember how it felt. Someone else's name was said right after yours. Someone else's achievement placed next to your failure. And in that moment, something inside you quietly shifted. What if the reason you doubt yourself today has nothing to do with your ability, and everything to do with how you were compared as a child? What if the voice in your head that says you're not enough isn't even yours? Many children grow up hearing sentences that sound harmless on the surface. Why can't you be like them? Look how well they're doing. They're younger than you and already better. These words don't sound violent, but they leave invisible scars. When you're a child, comparison doesn't motivate you. It confuses you. Your brain isn't built to process context or fairness. All it hears is one message. Someone else is better, and you are not. Over time, this message becomes internal. You stop needing others to compare you. You do it yourself. You walk into rooms already measuring your worth against everyone else. This is why this topic matters. Because comparison in childhood doesn't end in childhood. It grows with you. It shapes your confidence, your relationships, and the way you see yourself when no one is watching. The title and the thumbnail aren't exaggerations. A child who was constantly compared doesn't just feel pressured. They grow up feeling defective, like love has to be earned, not given. And if that sounds familiar, this video isn't here to blame your past, it's here to help you understand it, because understanding is where healing starts. There's a specific psychological pattern that forms when comparison becomes a regular part of childhood. And once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere in your adult life. When a child is constantly compared, their sense of safety slowly disappears. Home stops feeling like a place of acceptance and starts feeling like a performance stage. Love feels conditional, not stable. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" the child starts asking, "Am I enough yet?" Every action becomes an attempt to prove worth. Every mistake feels dangerous, not normal. This is how anxiety quietly begins. The child learns that being average is not safe, that rest is not allowed, that someone is always doing better, and that means you are falling behind. Even when no one is watching, the pressure remains. The comparison voice moves inside the child's head and never really leaves. It becomes self-talk. You might recognize it today. That voice that says, you should be further ahead. That someone your age is doing more. That you're late in life. That voice was trained early. What hurts most is that the child doesn't feel angry. They feel ashamed. They believe something is wrong with them for not measuring up, so they try harder. They become people pleasers, overachievers. Or they shut down completely and stop trying at all. Both reactions come from the same wound. Some children learn to survive by becoming perfect. Others survive by becoming invisible. Either way, they learn that being themselves is risky. And no one teaches them how to rest, how to enjoy progress without comparison, how to feel proud without looking sideways. The comparison may have been meant to push them forward, but psychologically, it pushes them away from themselves. This is only the surface, because the real damage of childhood comparison shows up later in how you see success, failure, and your own value. As the child who is compared grows older, success starts to feel empty. Achievements don't bring peace. They bring temporary relief. Relief from feeling behind. Relief from feeling judged. Instead of enjoying wins, you immediately look for the next thing to prove. You move the goalpost without realizing it, because comparison taught you that being enough is always temporary. This is why many adults who are compared as children struggle to celebrate themselves. Compliments feel uncomfortable. Praise feels suspicious. You're waiting for the but to follow. You might downplay your success or joke it away, not because you're humble, but because deep down, you don't believe it's safe to feel proud. Failure, on the other hand, feels devastating, not because of the mistake itself, but because it confirms an old fear, that you were never good enough to begin with. A small setback feels like proof of personal weakness. You don't see failure as feedback. You see it as exposure. This creates a constant state of tension. You're either chasing validation or bracing for disappointment. There's very little peace in between. Even your goals may not truly be yours. You choose paths that earn approval, not fulfillment. You measure success by how impressive it looks, not how aligned it feels. And when you finally reach what you thought you wanted, there's a strange emptiness. Because comparison never teaches you who you are, it only teaches you how to compete. This is why some of the most driven people feel the most lost. They were trained to win, not to understand themselves. But this pattern doesn't have to control you forever. Once you see it clearly, you can begin to separate your worth from performance. There's still one more deep effect of childhood comparison that shapes your relationships in powerful ways. Childhood comparison doesn't just affect how you see yourself, it deeply affects how you relate to other people. Especially in adulthood, when you were compared, other people stopped feeling like companions. They became measuring sticks. Even friends can feel like silent competitors. You might notice this in small moments. You feel uneasy when someone close to you succeeds, not because you're jealous, but because their success activates your old fear of being less. At the same time, you may feel guilty for feeling that way. You tell yourself you should be happy for them, and you are. But there's an undercurrent of self-doubt you can't control. This creates emotional distance. You keep people at arm's length. You don't fully open up, because comparison taught you that closeness invites judgment. Some people go the opposite direction. They attach themselves to high achievers, hoping proximity will increase their own worth. But that only deepens the comparison cycle. Romantic relationships are affected too. You may seek constant reassurance, or you may fear being replaced, because comparison trained you to believe love is conditional. You might overgive in relationships, overperform, overexplain, trying to secure your place so you won't be compared or discarded. And when conflict appears, it hits harder. Criticism feels like confirmation of your worst fear, that you're failing again. This is why people who were compared as children often struggle with boundaries. They confuse being loved with being useful or impressive. But relationships aren't meant to be competitions. They are meant to be safe spaces. And when comparison invades that space, connection becomes exhausting. Understanding this helps you stop blaming yourself for patterns you didn't choose. These behaviors were learned, and what's learned can be unlearned. The next part is important, because healing doesn't come from proving yourself. It comes from breaking the comparison loop entirely. Healing from childhood comparison starts when you stop trying to win. Not in life, but in your own mind. Because the competition you've been running was never fair to begin with. You were taught to measure yourself using someone else's ruler, someone else's timing, someone else's strengths. And no matter how hard you tried, you were always slightly behind in your own head. Breaking this pattern feels uncomfortable at first. When you stop comparing, you may feel lost, directionless, almost empty, because comparison gave you structure, even if it was painful. This is where many people panic. Without comparison, they don't know how to define success. They don't know what enough feels like, so they try to replace one comparison with another. But healing asks something different from you. It asks you to slow down, to notice what actually feels right, instead of what looks impressive. You begin by questioning the voice in your head. When it says, "You're behind," you ask, "Behind who?" When it says, "You're failing," you ask, "By whose standard?" At first, this feels fake, like you're lying to yourself. But slowly, you create distance between who you are and what you were taught to believe. You also learn to reframe mistakes, not as proof of inadequacy, but as evidence that you're human, that you're learning without a scoreboard attached. This is when rest starts to feel safer. You stop feeling guilty for slowing down. You stop needing to justify your pace, and something powerful happens. You begin to feel proud without checking if someone else is doing better. That pride is quiet, but it's real. Healing doesn't mean you lose ambition. It means your ambition becomes self-directed instead of comparison-driven. There's one final shift that ties all of this together, because healing isn't just about understanding the past. It's about reclaiming your sense of self. As you heal from being compared, you start to meet a version of yourself you were never allowed to know. A version that isn't rushed, isn't proving anything, isn't trying to be impressive. At first, this version feels unfamiliar. You might even feel lazy or unmotivated. But that's only because your nervous system is learning what safety feels like without pressure. For the first time, you begin to do things because you want to, not because you're afraid of falling behind. Your choices feel quieter, but more honest. You stop scanning rooms for where you rank. You listen more. You speak without rehearsing. You allow yourself to be average sometimes without shame. This is where confidence actually begins. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, but a calm sense of self that doesn't need comparison to exist. You also become more compassionate toward yourself and toward others. You stop seeing people as threats and start seeing them as individuals on their own timelines. The urge to compete slowly dissolves, not because you gave up, but because you no longer need to fight for worth. You learn that growth doesn't have to hurt to be real. That discipline doesn't require fear. That motivation can come from curiosity instead of pressure. This shift changes everything. Your work feels lighter. Your relationships feel safer. Your inner world feels less hostile. And the most important part is this. You realize the comparison never made you strong. Surviving it did, and now, you're choosing something better. All that's left is to bring this understanding together and turn it into something you can carry forward. If you were a child who was constantly compared, understand this clearly. There was never anything wrong with you. You were responding to pressure, not lacking potential. You didn't become anxious, self-critical, or overdriven by accident. You adapted. You survived an environment where love felt measured and approval felt earned. The habits you carry today once protected you, but they don't have to control you anymore. Awareness is the moment where survival turns into choice. You are allowed to move at your own pace. You are allowed to define success on your own terms, and you are allowed to exist without being measured. The comparison ends when you stop using other people as mirrors for your worth, when you decide that your value isn't up for debate. This doesn't mean you stop growing. It means you grow without fear, without constant self-judgment, without needing to outrun someone else's life. And that is real freedom. If this video resonated with you, take a moment and reflect. Where did comparison shape you? And what would change if you stopped letting it define you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading might finally feel understood because of your words. And if you want more psychology-based content that helps you unlearn what hurt you and rebuild with clarity, like the video and subscribe. You're not broken. You were trained, and you can retrain your